Joining us today, courtesy of Vivid Seats, Director of Amateur Scouting Mark Yannetti, and frankly, one of my favorite members of the organization. How are you doing today, Mark?
Doing well, thank you.
Zach asked me before you came in, we usually like to open it up with a bit of like a casual, friendly question. And I had one loaded, but then I completely forgot. And we spoke to you earlier today.
You're not starting with that question, are you? That's not a very friendly question.
No, it won't be that question. But you revealed a stunning knowledge of Harry Potter.
My wife.
But listen,
some of it gets to me on osmosis, but not.
So without revealing the answers, I'll just ask you, if there are answers, could you go through the King's roster and sort all the players into houses at Hogwarts?
Oh, God. I could sort the prospects in for sure. So could I? Oh, yeah, I would think so. Could I sort? I don't know that I could say, I don't know that I could sort Talbot into it. Like there's guys I know, like Dubois to Talbot, but then there's guys like Matty Roy who
All right.
But no, I'm not, as I said.
Don't they all just go into Gryffindor? Like, isn't that how Harry Potter works? No? All right.
As long as we don't have any Hufflepuffs, we're good. I know, I just got rid of 20% of your
Did I ever talk to you about the woman I met who was doing Zodiac-based scouting?
No, but I'm in.
I'm going to
get rid of our analytics team.
So she kind of disappeared. Jessica, if you're out there, please get in touch. But she had a whole website, and it was all based on like roster composition based on your astrological sign. You needed more fire signs than water signs. I don't remember all the details, but it was. It's not for me personally, but her commitment to it made it interesting.
My brother and his wife took vitamins depending on their aura.
So there you go.
And he doesn't believe in any of that, but he likes to stay married.
That's the key. So the real first question I was going to ask that I told Zach about was...
You remembered.
I do.
Yeah, there you go.
Every year, it happens 4, 5, 6 times a year, somebody comes out and says, what's your Mount Rushmore of fill in the blank?
Okay.
Or they ask every team, what's your Mount Rushmore of the LA Kings? And every time it happens, it drives me nuts because there's some goofy statue in a state that nobody wants to go to, happens to have 4 heads on it, and now I'm limited to... I can't have Gretzky, Kopitar, Brown, Robitaille, Doughty, Quick, and Vachon. I got to cut it down to 4, and it's impossible. And so the end result is, who cares? I'm going to use that as a backdoor into talking about the draft. We see rankings every year, 1 through 100, and there's no chance that the guy who's ranked 85th is that much different than the guy who's ranked 90th or 100th. You've talked to us in the past about the tier system before, so I just want to sort of go over that ground again and walk us through the idea of tiers versus rankings.
All right, so I don't have to answer my Mount Rushmore.
No, you don't have to do the Mount Rushmore. I just like complaining.
Did you ever play in
about
Rapid City?
I did not.
Didn't get there?
I never got there. No. So tiers and ranking.
Mm-hmm.
So again, ranking's linear, right? It's a staircase. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Tiers can be linear or they could be exponential. So, you could say, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could slide a piece of paper in. Like that's how I would. They're so close that you could slide a piece of paper in. But then 5 is Grand Canyon, and then 6, 7, 8. Or you can, as I said, you can. It depends on the draft. Usually, there will be. So usually there's tiers and there's breaks, right? So you'd argue there's a tier between Celebrini and then whether you have Demidov, Salayev, Lidstrom, whoever it is, there's a tier between them. And then you might say that Lidstrom and Hellenius are tightly wrapped. So it's 1 tier, Lidstrom, Hellenius, tier, and then you go Parik or Levashunov or Demidov, whatever it is. And then you have breaks, and usually a draft breaks. I think people, as I said, without saying that we think, I think people think that there's a break probably around the 14 or 15 mark of this year's draft. Usually there's a break around 9 to 12.
When you say break, you mean a big gap
difference
between...
So now it's a difference. As I said, with Grand Canyon, that's the difference between a tier and a tier. So, like you could say... Eichel and was it McDavid and Eichel, or was it Matthews, or whoever it was in that draft?
Yeah,
it was a break after 2. Because there were 2 generational players, and people use the word generational far too much, but there were legitimately 2 generational players. then there's a break there, which rarely happens. I mean, it can happen with me, but we don't usually worry about that break because it's one. But usually there's a break anytime between 9 and 15 in a draft. Every once in a while, it could be a little earlier or a little later, but a break would be a giant difference rather than tiers. But we could have as many as 7 people in a tier, as few as 1 person in a tier. I know in our first round, there were, again, without giving any, Celebrini's in his own tier. I don't mind saying that. It doesn't affect me or the draft. But then there's one other player later on who's in his own tier right now. Now, it could change, but and then there's a couple of groups of 2, a couple of groups of 4. So it's more of a way of establishing. The problem with when you have the players there is emotion takes over. You have an emotional react when you hear, Celebrini's name, when you hear Levashunov's name, when you hear Dickinson's name, and then you start focusing on the player rather than the slot. And then, one scout might like one player and another scout, and they end up in the same area, but 2 scouts have a very different opinion of them. So what happens is, instead of talking, it's Jimmy Johnson. We just, like, when Dean came in, we stole it from him, or what smart people adapt, bad people steal, we stole. So
that's right up your alley, Jason.
Yeah.
So as I said, rather than talk about a player, rather than talk about, we would always talk about a layer. So if there's 2 players in a layer, and you pick third, and there's 2 players left, and you're going to get one, you don't value that tier as much because you can move back a spot. If there's 4 players, you can move back further. If there's 6 players, and again, that's where the break is. So it's more of a way of valuing a slot rather than assigning a name, which can, like I said, if we have a tier of 4 players or 5 players in it, it would be extraordinarily rare that all the scouts have it in the order we have it in. Most of the scouts will agree that those 4 players belong together. Very few of the scouts would say the order is 1, 2, 3, 4. It's so, again, that tier takes some of that away. Yeah, okay, I recognize it. I'm not going to argue anymore because they are like, and it's vanilla or chocolate rather than, vanilla or chocolate. No one likes butterscotch. I think you can easily remove that.
So when you get into the tiers, does that factor into how you might look to make calls on a trade up or a trade down? When you have 7 players in your tier and you're first, you want to move back 6 picks to acquire additional picks. But if there's one guy in a tier that's higher, you might want to try to trade up to basically get good value by moving up, right?
Yeah, as I said, it's philosophy, right? Like Carolina, and I would agree most of the time you want to move down, really, in my opinion. But Carolina is a team that frequently moves back in the draft, and I think it's smart. But yeah, as I said, if you have 7 players that you consider razor thin, you don't care if you get the 7th player, as long as you get an additional asset. So, arguably, if you had Doughty and Stamkos in the same layer, I'm not saying we did, but if you had Doughty and Stamkos in the same layer, and you're picking one, technically you would trade back for a 7th round pick, except no one on the planet would do that. For some reason, you only trade back for a 2nd round. Like the value, it's getting a little better, but it's hard. Football has it a little bit better than we do. They're just like the thing I like about football is everybody knows the assigned value of a pick, right? Like you have Shucker's model in hockey, you have a couple other models, but nobody. I want it because I want it. I want a 2nd round pick to move back. Well, you're giving up 200 points in value. When a 4th round pick, you're giving up equal value. No, you don't want to lose, so you don't want to give up less value, and you always want to win. So if you're the team that's motivated to trade, you usually want to lose it by a little because you're not going to trade back if the team's going to win. Right. So, but the problem is, it's just, like as I said, I had a GM call. We were picking in the 20 era, so I don't give it away, but and a GM call and say, we'd like to move up. You have interest moving back? And I'm like, absolutely, we have interest moving back. And he's like, I'll give you a 6th. And it was to move back 2 or 3 spots in the first. And I'm like, well, the value's already been established. Philadelphia already moved for a 2nd. Now maybe it's tight enough that you'd move for a 3rd, but He's like, no, like, why would I do that? I'm like, well, then I said, well, here's the thing. The 6th round, we lose 42 points. Why are we going to move back and lose 42 points? Like, at least a 4th, it gets you in the talk. But that's the only thing. It's a little hard because so far moving in the NHL is still, it's getting better. Like, if you move back in the 1st, a certain amount of spots, it's usually a 3rd round pick. And if you move back more than 4 spots or 5 spots, now it's usually a 2nd round pick. And if you move in the 20s to the 30s, or if you move into the high teens, it's a 2nd. It's a little, but as I said, it's a little better. But in terms of, as I said, I wish everybody had the same, the same model and said it would be very easy. I think it would be very easy to move then. But people say, well, I just value it more. Like I don't want, I want this because I want it. So it's hard. It's hard to move. Like I always thought it would be easier, and again, I say it every year. And I should, I'm just too stubborn to realize it, I guess. But I always think it's going to be easier to move, and it just seems for some reason that when you really have an opportunity to move, you either can't do it or the asking price is, as I said, it's dumb. Like it's just so far out of the realm that you can't do it. And then like I can remember us not wanting to move, and I think it was the year we picked Voynov. I think we had like 9 or 10 offers to move up. Like this team's calling and calling and calling. And like the night before, and we weren't. That was our guy. We weren't moving. And then like years we wanted to move up. Like we wanted to. The Clifford year, we wanted to get Clifford and O'Reilly. We couldn't do it. Like we called, we called and offered, and then called back and offered more, and then called back and we actually got to the point where we went against our model just to try to move up. Nope.
I think I've asked some version of this before in a previous year, but are there teams where they have a reputation for fleecing other teams to the point where if they're calling you, if Carolina calls you and says, hey, we want to move back, are you interested? You start wondering, what do they know that you don't?
No, I don't know that there's a team that's fleecing. Like again, if we're looking at our pick right now at 21, Carolina's behind us. They're not moving up. They like to move back.
Right.
So, are we going to call Carolina if we want to move back? Probably just to do the due diligence, but I know the answer, So there's teams that have a reputation for moving. There's teams that have a reputation for moving up, and then there's teams that are moving back. So there's teams that just move. But again, it's very few teams move enough to have the reputation as movers. Carolina would be one of them.
So you have the 21st pick. You haven't had a first-round pick the last couple seasons. Does that load up anticipation, excitement? Is there a danger of overvaluing this first-round pick because it's the first one in 3 years?
Is there a danger of overvaluing? Absolutely. I mean, if you're not willing to objectively look at the situation, someone offered you 3 second-round picks at 35, 46, and 7, it's 60, whatever. Yeah, you should move back. In a vacuum. Obviously, if someone from number 6 in your list fell, you wouldn't want to move back. You wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to do it before the draft, but you could. But you can't just say, oh shit, God darn, we haven't had a first round pick in 3 years. We better make the pick. You'd be dangerously narrow minded.
If you look at the haul that you have overall. Not to ask for strategy, but you don't have a second and you don't have a third. Does the overall haul impact what you're looking at, maybe regardless of tiers, or is it still going to be based on that's first, the picks we have later come second?
Knowing what we have, as I said, it's something we make it more complicated than it's not rocket science. If you draft a guy in the first round and you want him to play 200 games, it's got a 60%, 60%-ish chance. And then if you go to the second round, you want to play 200 games, it goes down to 36%. And then in the third round, it goes down to 12%. So, I would like to have a second round pick. You don't want to have holes. So my goal going into this draft in a vacuum would be to find a way to get a second round pick or a third round pick. Obviously both would be perfect. It's not as feasible, but I would want to consider at least consider going into the draft of turning your first into a late first and a late second. And again, then you have to look at the tiers. If it's late first, does it take you out of a tier? Does it take you out of a break? But you don't. Yeah, I mean, having that big a gap in the second and third, certainly it'll affect the efficacy of your draft, and it'll affect, the problem is you start allocating resources like, well, we don't have a second or a third, and you focus on different areas of the list where you think your picks to come from, and then inevitably someone either falls, or now you finally have the opportunity to move up, which you never have before. And you got to be careful of being prepared the right way.
I was recently introduced to a quote by Robert McNamara, of all people, and if I've got it right, it's measure what's important, don't make what you can measure important.
Nice work, because I listened to your podcast today, and you were like, "Oh, I love this quote," and then you messed up the quote in the podcast. But you nailed it.
But we've heard for a couple of years now about the Kings' hit rate when it comes to drafting guys, and you just threw out 200 games. Why is 200 games the measure for success of a draft pick?
So it's not as arbitrary as you think, right? Like, again, now, I've gotten pretty good with the stat. Okay.
I'm going to add a little bit of, because there are Kings players that have been drafted that have played close to that amount that I don't think a lot of people would necessarily qualify as successful hits.
All right, so after I answer, I'd like to know, just opinion-wise, because I like the context of that. Well, again, 200 is an easy number, right? If you play 200, I mean, the odds of someone playing 200 games in the NHL is slim. So you've already whittled it down to, again, 100 games in the NHL is successful. Now, 40 games in the NHL is successful if you, like, again, your odds of hitting in the 7th round are 1.7%. So let's say 2%. Like, so that means, we have 100 drafts, we're going to find a 200 game player twice. Like, so you're telling me that finding a 50 game player in the 7th round isn't valuable? Well, it's valuable because if he can come up there and play 50 games, now whether it's filling in for an injury or where you don't have to trade, or you're getting, AAV of 775,000 to alleviate cap space, those guys, like a Kevin Gravel in the 5th round is a successful pick. As I said, it does things in different areas. Now, obviously, you want point in the 3rd. I'm not, but again, so 200 games is a really easy thing, because even in the 1st round, if you get rid of the top 5 picks, it's still only 60%. It's only a 60% chance you're getting 200 games. So that's a good benchmark stat. As I said, it's not arbitrary. It's not the most in-depth, because if you really did it, well, at 1 you want this many games, at 5 you want this many, at 12 you want this many games. But 200 games is, it's 3 seasons. It's, you aren't just, you've gone through a contract. You're not just a depth player. You're not just above, an above replacement player. And as I said, the further down the draft you get, the less likely it is. But as I said, if I wanted to make the Kings look good, I'd use 1, and or if I wanted to make the Kings look good, actually, like our success rate from the 4th rate on, I do 100 games after the 4th. Like, you can tweak it a whole lot. It's harder to tweak if you just use the same standard, like 200 games.
How many games does that player have to play with the organization that drafts him? Because just to throw out a specific example of a player that I thought was going to be great, Michael Amadio is 369.
Exactly the player I was
369 games. He was, a 2nd round pick, I think?
3rd, I think.
90th overall. Is that a win for the Kings for drafting a guy in the 3rd round who plays 400 games?
So now you're getting into nuance, right? Is it a successful draft pick? Absolutely. You drafted a guy who's going to approach 500 games, maybe, in the 3rd round. But again, you have to factor in, is it a success as a draft pick? So in the vacuum of space, it's a success. I mean, you outperformed the slot. It's a good pick. But what did you get from Michael Amadio? Like, what did you get for Thomas Hickey? Thomas Hickey played 430 games. Yeah. It's a good pick. Wasn't the right pick, but it's a good pick.
20 minutes in for our first Thomas Hickey reference.
Well, I'm saying, it's easy to go back there. Again, it's a good pick. Look at how many guys picked there. I mean, that's a good. It wasn't the right pick, but now if you look at it, it's a failed pick, because you took a 4th overall asset, you accumulated 4th overall games, and you got 0 overall return. You didn't get 4th overall return. You didn't get 100th overall return. You got no return. So, like Simmons playing a whole lot of games for other teams than us. Shen playing a whole lot of games for other teams than us. Like, Simmons is as successful a draft pick as you can. He wasn't rated as high, and we took him. he wasn't expected to play that many games. He outperformed his draft slot. Oh, and you traded him in a package that got a player that helped you win the first Stanley Cup in the organization's history. So you can have, anytime a guy plays 200 games, it's a successful draft pick. It's just maybe not a successful use of the whole asset.
But you added in the trade for Richards as a Owen also, but to me that's the thrust of why those guys had value for the Kings. Like, they were traded before they had a chance to become long-term players for the Kings.
Dean used the word way back when, NHL currency. Mm-hmm. So you have NHL currency. You have players on your roster. You have prospects. You have draft picks. Everything is, again, boiled down. I don't want to be mercenary, but everything boiled down. If we turn, if we turn the 20th overall pick into Fiala or whatever, you used NHL currency, but again, future commodities, to get current, as I said. So it depends. Like, I mean, you could trade, trying to think of back, like, again, so Tubert's a failed pick, right? There's no one in the world that's going to argue that we made the right pick at that spot. However, Amadio is a great amateur pick, which was not really a good return on the asset. He played enough games for us to get some return on the asset, but you didn't really get that return on the asset. However, Tubert, you failed as an amateur staff, and you helped turn him into Penner, which helped us win a cup.
Right.
So you have Simmons, who helps you win the cup, and you have Tubert, who helps you win the cup. So the good thing is Dean is able to salvage a mistake or a bad thing, and it's similar. Rob's done similar things with similar. It's just easier to talk about the past than the present without giving stuff up. But so as I said, you can make you can fail and have success, and you can have success and fail, and then you get what usually happens. You draft the guy and he plays for your team for he either doesn't play. I mean, usually they don't play, but you get the normal return on the player. He plays, and like Martinez is great. Like, Martinez is as good a use of an asset. He played forever, and then you traded him, and you got pretty good value at 2 seconds and such.
You put like an Anderson in that category too, kind of similar thing, or is it still a little bit too early to
Mike, are you talking Mikey? Well, Mikey's an exceptional pick. He's way outperformed his draft slot. He's a character and a culture guy. He's a guy who has reached the top of his potential, in my opinion. And as I said, he's anchored on the first pairing for like anything. I mean, 3 years ago, Mikey was a good pick. So I mean, Matt Roy, these guys are exceptional picks. As I said, we talked about Point's an exceptional pick. That's obviously exceptional. But then you have some of these more guys that you don't realize, you don't appreciate. Like, you don't appreciate the flexibility. Like Matt Roy, hitting in the 7th, like Nick Dowd, Matt Roy, hitting in the 7th, AAV, like cap wise, like asset, like you want, even if you just want to go out and get an F10, it's going to cost you over the course of the contract. It's probably going to cost you $3 to $6 million more, depending on the level of F10, or the assets you have to go out to get the player who's going to play.
I'm going to need a definition of F10.
Forward 10.
All right.
So
that's
10,
what I figured.
Yeah, 10th forward.
Yeah,
F10,
sure.
10th forward. You could use middle 6. Yeah. You could use, bottom 3, whatever. So, just the amount of money that you saved inserting Matt Roy into the lineup. So you've now filled a slot that you fill a top 4D slot with a 7th round pick, which shouldn't happen, and you're filling it. Unfortunately for Matt, you're filling it at an economic rate until this year. I mean, his contract is crazy good, and even now it's good.
Yeah. So you look at the way the Kings are built right now, and you have a guy who kind of fits that model. Maybe it's Akil Thomas, right? We finally saw a return on Akil Thomas this year, saw the kind of player he could be. Is that an exciting one of, I think he was, 2018 that you guys picked him, to see the return on him, and now he could be on the roster as that value pick, as someone who's not going to he could be the F10 potentially at a much less than F10 value.
Yeah, it's great. And again, it's like, at Akil Thomas, we drafted him to, at his spot, at Thomas's spot in the draft, we drafted him to be closer to like an F7, in that area. But as I said, usually if you draft checkers they don't make it. But if you draft skill players and they can't quite make it, they turn into role players. And like again, I think Akil can make a difference to help us win. You see some of the things he did when he came up, and when he was healthy in Ontario, some of the things he did. So yeah, I mean, again, it's philosophy, but with the way it is now, younger players make an impact more. You see it in a lot of places. You don't have their rights for, at 27, they're gone. And depending on our rights and everything, they could be gone earlier. So you almost have to integrate them in, A, because they're ready earlier, B, because you don't have them as long, and C, because it's so much more cost effective to put Akil in the lineup than it is to go out and, and get one of these guys for $2 million or $3 million, or more. So again, having an Akil Thomas come up, maybe a year from now having a Andre Lee come up, like some of these guys, as I said, LaFerriere in the lineup in the spot he was. That's a huge bonus, because now you want to go out and get that guy. Now you're talking in the $3 to $5 million range in terms of filling that hole. And he didn't quite fill it as well as a $3 to $5 million player would, but at his salary he exceeded it. So yeah, I think every year you need a Thomas coming into the lineup, and you probably need two, whether it's a forward or a D, or I think you need two of those guys coming in every year now. I really believe that. I think if you can do that, it gives you a versatility with the cap. And there's a different energy when young guys come up. When you go way back, when Nolan and King came up, there was a different energy. When Toffoli and Pearson came up, there was a different energy. Even like when you see Turk come up this year, like all of a sudden you're watching him and Byfield play together, and there's a different energy when they're out there, because it's infectious sometimes. It's just, I think there's a whole bunch of reasons having those guys. Obviously financial, but it changes the dynamic when they're in the lineup.
I'm going to backtrack a little bit, and I apologize if, again, this is ground that we might have covered in previous years, but when the scouting staff, right, not one person can't do the job of the entire staff. So if you're all sitting around, I don't know, in maybe July the year before, the next year, because I'm assuming you're already preparing for the 2025 draft a little bit. Well,
during this year, I said, you're always, like right now we're not, but throughout this year we've prepared for next year's draft.
So if Andy Johnson comes to you and says, I got a guy, he's tier 2 for 2025, how much vetting does the staff have to do collectively to say, okay, we agree with that assessment?
Not as much as you'd think. Is it not in terms of that early? In terms of coming up to be?
Well, just if somebody says this is the guy, I have all the faith in the world that he's going to be incredible, and you've never heard of him. How many hours of tape do you have to watch before you're like, okay, this guy?
It would be rare that he's going to be incredible, and I wouldn't hear of him. But but Andy will have his list, or Teddy, and I do very little vetting of their list. I'll take note if I go to a game and they're playing. I'll obviously watch and report. But in terms of that, the vetting is done by the area guy.
Okay.
And then when the year comes, we know about them. In Nick Dowd's year, Tony knew about him earlier than anybody else and said that this is a guy we might want to consider. And okay, this is what he is, and then he does the background work, and he talks to the coaches, he talks to some of the as I said, he does the work up until the handoff point when, okay, Yank, now it's, we got to draft this guy. Oh, okay, really? So now I start watching some of the film. Now Bernie starts watching some of the film. You get Nick Sinclair. You get a couple of guys. Like what I usually do is, before a guy comes to me, 3 of our scouts will watch him on video or live. If he's you'll have Teddy and Andy if he's a U.S. guy, they will have live reports on him, and then maybe Ron Payette goes in and watches a video of the guy and it confirms what they're saying and say, oh, great. Maybe it doesn't confirm, and now you get Nick Sinclair or Stefan Vigier to watch it, and it does confirm or confirms what Ron says. And now there's a disconnect. And now it's off my plate. If there's looks like there's something there, now it makes its way up.
Can there be a scout? I've watched entirely too many movies lately that take place around drafting players in other sports, whether it's Draft Day or Trouble with the Curve or whatever it is. Terrible movies, although fun. But there's always like that grizzled scout where he comes in and he says it and that's it. Like, can Christian Rutu say, this is who we're taking with the 3rd round pick. I stake my reputation on it, and you just go, all right, well, it's Christian Rutu. So
if Christian Rutu says a guy's good,
yeah,
I know he's good.
All right.
But there's no one on the staff who can come in and say, this is the guy we're taking. I mean, I guess I could. I've never done it. I mean, I guess I could, but like I've never come in and say we're drafting. Again, Drew Doughty. Like again, we had 5 guys that we vetted. If Roots comes in and says a guy can play, I know the guy can play. Like Roots gets it. If Chris Burns says this guy's a 1st round pick, yeah, I get it. But nobody is getting put on the list without multiple reports, multiple points of contact, multiple scouts watching.
So when you go back, we talked about the tiers earlier. I use tier ranking when I draft my fantasy football team. I'm sure that we all do to some extent.
It's not like it's rocket science.
Right. The difference that I found is in fantasy football, I need 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and a tight end. Different for what you're doing because you're building a prospect pool. Does position matter at all when it comes to tiers or maybe runs on players like a goaltender? There might be runs where you lose all of the players at one position due to like scarcity or quality of a draft.
So like again, with the fantasy, you're drafting for the immediacy, right? So
only
like again, so with the amateur, it's a 5 to 7 year projection. Like that's the other thing people don't realize. Like the average 1st round pick is 5 years before they actually contribute. And they might play in year 3 or 4, contribute in year 5, and established in year 6. Like that's the 1st round guy. Like people don't understand how long it takes most of the guys. So you're drafting for 5 to 7 years down the future. Like most of our analytic projections start at 5 years. And we have a couple that start at 3, but it's 5 years to 7 years where they are. So in terms of a tier, it's not this, but in terms of a tier, if there are 4 players in a tier, you can take the one with blue eyes. No, I'm just saying you're saying they're so close that you can. If they're in a tier, you're saying they're so close, it's hard to delineate which one is better. So there's really, as I said, that's the idiot's version of. But so if we give Rob 4 guys in the same tier, he could say I want the biggest guy. No, he could say I want the most competitive guy. He could say, for lack of a better, I want the hockey sense guy. You know what? We drafted 3 college guys last year, and we drafted 3 college guys this year. The age distribution curve puts them further out sometimes. So you know what? We need to draft a North American. Is there a North American in the tier? Or vice versa. You might have drafted 3 guys in the Ontario League, Western League, or Quebec League, which are going to come up for their contract earlier than if you put a guy in college for 4 years, or you have a guy in Europe for 3 or 4 years. So maybe the opposite happens. Okay, we're really, we need to space out some contracts, some age distribution. So maybe you do it. Or, as I said, right or wrong, we were a goal like when we had Quick and Jones and Bernier. So there were years where anytime a goalie was in a tier, he automatically went to the bottom. We don't need a goalie. Like, we had Frederick Anderson tell us if we drafted him, he won't come. And he's like, if you don't believe me, look what I just did to Carolina with Cam Ward. And Quick's better than Ward. So as I said, there were at least 5 years, I have to go back. Anytime there was a tier, the goalie automatically got moved to the bottom of the tier. So, and then you wouldn't do it often, but you could skip 1 tier. So if there was a goalie in this tier, you could do that. But that's far more rare.
Going back to 2004-05, Anaheim was allegedly better suited than the Kings. And then there's that famous moment where Jim Fox and I'm blanking on the Ducks announcer's name. Apologies, everybody.
Brian Hayward.
Yeah, thank you. And they say who's closer to winning the cup next year. And
I don't think that was 2005.
No, the question was asked 2011, but I'm just saying the Ducks had the 2nd overall pick in 2005.
They were closer in 05.
Yeah. Well, they won in 2007, but the Kings won in 12 and 14. If I had to pick, I'd go with the Kings.
Totally.
But as a scout, I was joking with somebody near the end of the season, and they were teasing me about what I would do if I was the GM. And I said, you've got it all wrong. I'd be the guy who misses the playoffs every year, but constantly trades veterans for more picks. I would just hoard picks like a madman. I know I'd be a bad GM. But as a scout for an organization, a head scout, director of amateur scouting, does it hurt your soul just a little bit to see the amount of picks and prospects moved out of the organization for veteran players. The phrase that keeps getting thrown in my face is parades over prospects.
No, I can tell you, I could care. I should. If I say care, I seem apathetic about it. I'm not. What we do is go back to what we do is provide NHL currency. Now, I want to see our guys moved out for the right players. I want to see them moved out at the right time. I want to see the return. But here's the fact of the matter. There's guys that are here in the organization. Guys are here in there's a hierarchy. Rob Blake determines what we do. My job is to provide him with the most assets, the most credits, the most currency for him to do what he thinks is best with it. That's it. Like, again, I won't name them, but there's a couple of scouts I've heard complain in the media, like in terms of they traded all our picks. Our 20th pick this year is there to do whatever makes the team better. If we never, I want to draft guys because we do it. If we never draft a guy and we win the Stanley Cup, cartwheels everywhere. Like again, it'll suck that I don't have an impact on, or less of an impact on the team. But that's I don't know. I can honestly say I didn't agree with all the moves Dean made. And he's I said some of the things we're on board with, some we're not. As I said, Rob and I would probably agree on a lot of things, but we haven't agreed on everything. But he's the boss. My job is to make sure that he has the most currency to do his job with. So whether it's to use the picks, whether it's to use a prospect, like if we build a good prospect pool, they're either going to play for us or get us a better player. So I'm perfectly happy handing all of that over to him and letting him do what he thinks is the right thing. And I don't know if I know guys get pissed because I hear about it in from other teams, whether it's guys grumbling, whether it's guys, or whether even guys have the balls to say it on the radio, which is crazy, or but no, I mean, as I said, if our 20th pick this year and two of our prospects get us one of the pieces we need to win the cup next year, great.
Clearly, you and your team scouted Eric Portillo.
Yes.
When you look at the haul of this draft, do you count Eric Portillo as a part of the haul from this draft?
Yeah, Eric Portillo is an amateur draft pick. He was drafted in the 3rd round by the LA Kings.
This year.
That's how I look at it. That's how I look at it.
To clarify for those listening or watching, the pick was traded for Eric Portillo. Wasn't this year's 3rd round pick?
Right. So, Buffalo drafted Eric Portillo, but he was an amateur. For all intents and purposes, Eric Portillo was drafted in the 3rd round of this year's draft. I think that's a great return. But yeah, anything acquired amateur-wise is the amateur pick. For all intents and purposes, Blake Ozot's an extra 7th round pick. McDermott's an extra 7th round pick. Jones is an extra 7th round. That's how I view them.
Let's get into the idea of NHL currency because I like that.
I like that too.
Yeah, especially since if you never traded away a pick or never acquired any more picks, you'd have 7 picks every year. You'd be 3 years into drafting, and all of a sudden you have more guys than you can fit on a roster. So what are we even talking about? But I want to go backwards if I can to 2021 because that was a year you guys only had 4 picks. Brandt Clarke was one of them. I feel like everybody in the organization is pretty positive about Brandt Clarke.
I hope so.
Francesco Pinelli and Samuel Hellenius are in Ontario playing their roles, getting development. Kirill Kirsanov is still playing in the KHL, if I'm not mistaken.
He is, but he'll be there for another year. But we'll see.
I don't want to put your feet on the fire.
You never can tell. But again, we're active in working with.
So the reason I bring up is because when he was drafted, I think you said he was the closest to having NHL ready skills out of that draft class.
He was as I said, Clark was, but
sure.
but
Clark had a higher ceiling.
Kirill was a man at that time.
Do you still feel as positive about him as you did then?
Do I still feel as positive about Kirill? Yeah, but the KHL is a great league. Mm-hmm. It's arguably the 2nd best league in the world. I mean, it's elite. It's not a very good league for young players, and I don't care what they say. Like you watch Mitchkov get no ice time and traded it's. I wish I could sit down with Russian players and make them understand it's not a very good development league. However, if I'm a Russian and I have a chance to play in the KHL, how the hell would I not play there? It's my home country. It's prestigious. You get more money. Like, they can pay Kirill more than we can. Like, I think that had he come over and had the chance to work with our development staff, the ways that other guys have and stuff, he would be further along. I think he is very close to being ready to play right now. That hasn't changed. He's a better player today than he was then. I think he could be a lot better, depending on circumstance. But if I could wave a wand and get Kirill here this year, like, he'd have a chance at least to make the team. It's a pretty good team right now. I think he would have had a better chance to make it a couple of years ago when we was drafted. But I certainly think he's the same player, the same value, just he could be further along his development path in a different way. That's all.
So when I look at drafted players, it's my own block, I guess, is I look at the guys that were picked in the most recent draft, and then we pick new players, and I kind of forget about those guys, and I move on. The guys after that, it's just a flaw of the system for me, I guess. But I'm looking at the guys that we picked last year. Two names that have stood out to me throughout the course of the year that were probably the two least talked about players when we picked them were Conmey and Slukinski, who are racking up accolades throughout the course of their years. Like, they're so far away from being, say, NHL contributors. But how exciting is it to watch those guys succeed at the levels that they're at when they were your last two players picked, or third and fifth players picked in the most recent draft?
Sukinski the fourth, and then Monty in the fifth, right? And then Conmey in the sixth.
Yeah.
No, it's as I said, it's really exciting. Did we expect Slukinski to do what he did this year? We expected Slukinski to be good. Like, I think people were sleeping on Slukinski. It's as I said, it's a harder thing. We certainly didn't expect him to go to the USHL, have a historic goals against, historic save percentage, win the championship, goal trend of the year. No, we didn't expect that, but that's.
If you did, you would have picked him in the second round, right?
That's wicked exciting. Like again, I can't tell you. Like I'm watching the USHL games. There was one time I didn't look at the score and I watched the game just because I was, it was already determined who won, but I wanted to see it real time because I wanted to see what happened. And then Billy Ranford called me after the game, messed that all up. But it was really exciting. And then going to UNH is pretty close to me. So anytime I have a night off or something like that and UNH is playing, I just shoot up. Like, as I said, like a 6th round pick, unheralded. He was one of the drivers of that team. It's really exciting. Like, as I said, I get like Matt Roy is one of my most exciting draft picks. Like I remember watching his first development camp. Like, this guy's gonna play. Like going to Dean. Like, this guy's that's real. Like, again, nothing can beat the excitement of Drew. Like, you can't. Like, it was one of our first picks. It was the first pick Mike and I made together. He was a franchise changer. He was defining. So nothing can change that excitement. That's a different level of excitement. But the gratification and the excitement I get from watching more unheralded guys, it's probably a little more fulfilling, maybe not as exciting.
When you go to
I got a Cam Close story.
Okay.
Cam Close.
Yeah.
Former Ontario broadcaster. We know him well. UNH alum. He'd always be calling me. He's like, this Conmey kid. He's driving the team. He's like, this kid's. Hope he doesn't transfer out. Like, gotta keep him here. This kid's good.
I'll tell you after a Conmey thing. You'll like it. But
when you go to an NCAA game, I have no idea what kind of like press box or whatever they might have. But are you Mark Yannetti, LA Kings, or are you just buying a ticket and sitting in the seat?
Every time I go to a game, I sneak in. Like, no, I don't say sneak in. Like, I don't mean like the back door. Although it used to drive Kim Mueller in Manchester crazy because I would sneak in the back door and well, again, Dean used to get pissed, and I get it. But like, if I go to a game and I sit there in a suit and a tie and I got a clipboard and everything, you get asked 50 million questions. But if I just go in and sit in the stands and I'm unassumingly dressed and I have my iPhone instead of a clipboard or my iPad, it looks like I'm playing a game or something. No one bothers you. Again, I went to Brown one. This is a couple years ago. Brendan Woodett, the coach there. unbelievable guy. We were freshmen at Brown together and hung together and got into trouble together. Wouldn't even give me a ticket. He certainly wouldn't let me in the press box. I'm like, what's going on? But no, as I said, it depends. Like each one's different. If I can go to a game and be unassuming and have no one know who I am and put a toque on and just sit there, that is heaven for me.
It's a beanie for Southern California.
Oh, yeah. As I said, it's again, Monona and I went to a game. We went to watch Conley. And I'm sitting there, and 12 people come up, want their picture taken with her, and she's gracious, and she's wonderful. She's absolutely wonderful in the way that she deals with, but it affects the ability to watch the game, so it's great for me because especially if she's there, no one's going to look at me. I just sit in the rail and just they're talking, just writing. So, but as I said, for me, I went to a game with Jeans once with Dean, and we walk in, and he's like, I can't swear, but he's like, what the F are you doing? And I'm like, what? He goes, that's $50. I go, what? He was wearing jeans. $50. I go, okay. He goes, no, go to an ATM. I want it now. He's dead serious. Right? I literally had in Lewiston, Maine. I had to go find an ATM in Lewiston, Maine. I had to go to an ATM. I had to give him $50. We sit down in the stands, and I'm just sitting there looking like I do. 100 people. Dean's got his clipboard, and he's got his glasses, and he's got his briefcase, and he didn't watch 1 second of the game. It's just a parade of people coming up talking, and I just sat there scouting the game. Like, that's $50 I ever spent.
Now, did you have to give him 100 and he gives you change? Because no ATM I know.
I forget what it was. I think I might have had $10 in my wallet. I never have money. I'm so bad at that.
I want to talk about another player that you drafted this past year because it was fascinating to me at the time because it's Jacob Dvorak. And we talked to Roots, Christian Roots, about his skating, and then heard from independent scouts that his skating was bad. But then his season got a little bit weirder because he came over from Scandinavia, blanking on the country.
Came over from Czech, right?
Yes, there you go. To the CHL. How much input do the Kings have over a decision like that?
We'll support the player. Again, when we talk to, I think the best path for Jake would have been coming over right away. Those leagues don't like playing young guys, and he played in that league a little bit as he played I think 21 games before his injury, his draft year. But it's still if something goes wrong in Sweden or Finland or Czech, they get rid of the young guy. The guy who has the least impact on it. That's just how it is. But there's also something to be said for comfort. If they're not ready to come over, and you force the issue, and they're like, I miss home, I miss my girlfriend, I miss my family, I miss, I miss home cooking, I just miss the culture. You force the issue, you can get, you can run into problems. So I think you have to listen to him. Again, he didn't want to come over. He wanted to go to the, but then he's over there, and again, what happens? The team's not playing well. They bring in 3 older guys. It's all of a sudden he's the one who gets less ice time. Again, you see it. You're starting to see it more and more. You see it with some of the with Euros coming over post World Junior. He wanted to do it earlier, and he spent time preparing, so he didn't go to the World Junior, so he could prepare to Swift Current. But you're starting to see that more and more. These kids are starting to key on to the fact that if I'm going to get diminished ice time, and sometimes it's in their deals. It's the same way. Some of the guys come to the American League, and if they're not in the NHL, they're going back to Sweden. So you're starting to see that. But as I said, if a kid wants to leave school and we don't think it's right, we say, listen, we think you should stay in school for 1 more year. And he says, well, I want to come out. No, if he wants to come out, we don't have much choice. We support their decision. We may give advice, or we may steer gently, but there's no hard rudder, there's no hard push.
Is it easier to monitor Swift Current than it is Czechia?
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
100%. There's nothing easier than a CHL team. Nothing easier. And the college teams are great with us. The USHL, like Fargo was awesome with us. We had unlimited access to the point, but it's different. You can't, with the CHL, we can go and do whatever the hell we want, and we don't affect his eligibility. We can go, you know what I mean? There's an unfettered and unlimited access without running afoul of any rules or arbitrariness. So the CHL is the easiest in terms of monitoring.
Sorry to jump in.
You're good.
Signaled you to. So I just talked to Hampton Slakinski earlier today. People listening to this will have heard it a week or two ago. So he's finishes high school, then he's in Fargo for the USHL, then he's going to college. Are all the rules that will apply to him in the future still applying to him when he's in the USHL?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's rough.
Well, as I said, like you got to, as I said, we have to be careful. Like again, it's simple things. Like like you just like again, if Caleb Lawrence or Zima or whatever, go take him out for pizza. Fly him here. Like fly the parents. Like I said, there's rules, but you have to be real careful. Like I think Hampton's family was driving 9 hours or 7 hours every time to see him play. Like, we could make that easier, like that. Well, except then you have to worry about his eligibility. Like, you know what I mean? Like, again, the rules are in place for a reason.
He's not even in college, though. I mean, he will be.
But if he wants to go to college, as I said, like, as I said, you want to buy Hampton a car, he can't go to college. You know what I mean? Like you want to fly his family down so it's easy for them to, you can't go to college. So those things don't matter. I'm just saying, as I said, we had the access that Fargo provided us was second to none. Like, I truly feel that we had a partnership with Fargo, but we had to always be cognizant not to run afoul and do anything to jeopardize Hampton. You don't have to worry about that. As I said, it's just easier. It doesn't mean you can't do as good a job. It's just a little more work, a little more focus, a little more planning to do. And then the further you go to check, like now, like we're lucky we have Peter there, but if you don't, as you said, now you got to, now it's 7 more steps.
All I was going to ask is how easy is it to not have to scout War Road High School anymore on the student camera sitting at center ice, one angle following the play back and forth.
I was like, this kid, I told Teddy and Andy, this kid better be like, I've now been to War Road, like, I don't understand. I've been there like 7 times now between, like, they have an uncanny amount of players. Like in the last,
it's Minnesota.
Yeah. Although my last 2 views or 3 views of Hampton were in Minneapolis with Excel. So
a little better.
It was pretty easy.
I think we've covered most of the players that I wanted to touch on.
Same. Yeah.
We about ready to wrap up?
Yeah, I got my list.
All right. There's 2 more players I want to ask about. One is Caleb Lawrence because he just signed his ELC and is one of those players, deep pick. How excited are we about Caleb Lawrence?
Well, since December or January this year, we're extraordinarily excited. Like, we were, again, we drafted this, he was already going to Calgary's camp. We drafted him because we liked him, and we couldn't get him to go to our camp because he'd already chose. So if we wanted Lawrence, we had to draft him. He provided size, but he's got skill and sense. Like, you don't see a package like that. He had missed years of hockey. So it's really exciting because of where he came from and some of the adversity he fought through. And it's exciting because, and again, the light goes off for different kids at different times. Wayne Simmons gets it 3 days after the draft. Toffoli gets it 3 years after the draft. Isamont gets it 6 years after the draft or 7 years after the. So the light bulb goes off different times. For him, he got traded twice. Until then he gets to London, and playing for the Hunters is like, it's too bad that everybody in the OHL can't play for the Hunters because the Hunters turn you into pro. They get it. They've been there. They if Caleb didn't go to London, I wonder where we'd be right now. It's again, we've been preaching certain things for him for a couple years now, and he'd get it, and then it would wave, and he'd get it, and then he'd wave, and then, as I said, credit to the kid too. It's not just credit to the Hunters because the kid has to do it. Everything that we want to see out of him, he started to do, and then he started to do more consistently, and then he started to do better, and then then the consistency and the better. He made leaps and bounds. He made 2 years of development in 6 months, and then one of the things we like about him is the edge he can play with, and that's one of the things that would ebb and flow before this year. He gets this. He's playing great. Like, he's their second line center. They're rolling through the playoffs. obviously I don't think it's as big a hit as the OHL does because I'm biased, but it's a 2-minute penalty maybe. And then he gets suspended for 5 games. And I'm like, oh. Then he comes back and he's rolling again. And they're really excited. And then he takes another 2-minute penalty and they suspend him for 5 more games. And it said now he's playing well, but I would have liked to have seen those 10 games. So it's exciting because if he can continue, it's easy to do for 6 months. But if he can continue to do this and it becomes a staple of who he is, he adds a size-based, skill-based, sense-based, edge-based element. In various degrees, but usually you get an edge-based element and a size-based element. Or you get a skill-based element and a sense-based element. You don't usually get those. So if he can keep if he can keep those attributes together like he has for 6 months, it's something we don't have in the organization right now.
You gave me one more question to ask because you mentioned Mikey Asimont. So when you're seeing Johnny Brodzinski, Mikey Asimont, Mike Amadio, all these guys out there in the league playing playoff games, that's got to feel good.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, it's good and bad, right? You're like, oh, could they help us? Could they, But as I said, we've been successful in drafting. They can't all play for you. That's why they're NHL. As I said, now you want to maximize the asset, but quite frankly, I mean, Mikey didn't get it until a little later. So it's certainly fulfilling to see guys you draft have success and then again, the ultimate success is playing in the playoffs and playing deep in the playoffs. That's that was Dean's biggest thing. What do you want to be, Drew? And he's an NHL player. Oh, all right, big deal. Well, what do poor Drew's racking his brain for 2 weeks. Dean didn't give him the answer. We interviewed him, and then he finally comes back like sweating. It's like his 6th answer, and he goes, "A winner." And Dean's like, "Yeah, you want to be a winner." It's seeing that certainly it's certainly a feel good, but it's also what could have been. But as I said, if Mikey doesn't have the adversity and not sticking with us, does he become the player he is that plays in the playoffs, or does he become a guy who surfs his way to 75 games or 80 games? So sometimes there has to be a catalyst. Again, does Brodzinski do what he does without? This is his 3rd team, right? What I mean?
Might even be his 5th.
Right.
Yeah.
So as I said, certain things, certain stimuli have to happen sometimes for these guys to, evolve.
Last question. In the late teens, 2000 teens, Cale Clegg and Jared Anderson Dolan got a ton of attention, probably more than was warranted. No disrespect to them, but because there was no first-round pick in 16 and because Gabriel Verlardi took a couple years for health, Anderson, Dolan, and Clegg wound up being the highest profile draft picks that the Kings had taken. We shed our share of the spotlight on them, and expectations were probably higher than they ought to have been for 2 second-round picks. And the team then didn't make the playoffs in 17 and swept in 18 and then not in 19. So all of a sudden, the team's not doing well. You have these prospects who are getting higher expectations than they deserved. Neither one of them really ultimately pans out the way I think people wanted them to. The reason I'm bringing all this up now is Jack Hughes is taken in the 2nd round in a year where there is no first-round pick. But the team's making the playoffs, so he's not getting that. Right, nobody's waiting for Jack Hughes to come along and save the franchise. But how is Jack Hughes doing?
Well, as I said, you could argue that Anderson Dolan was a sexy pick. He had 50 goals at one point in his WHL career. I think he might have had 100 points. Oh, Andy's a culture guy, right? So now all of a sudden you start thinking on both fronts. I could see. As I said, I expected more out of him as well. And again, he's going to get his 200 games. He's going to. I think he's going to get, but certainly the expectations were high. I can understand why they were high, and then you're right. There's a little more focus, because you got to have something. You got to grab onto some life fast when you're not.
And usually there's a first round pick blocking a lot of that.
And then Clegg was a guy who was rated in the top 15 at one point, his pre-draft year and draft year, and then fell. So you're like, ooh, did they steal a guy? Because of course you don't. Of course we stole the guy. Of course we knew more than everyone else, and then you find out, well, you kind of knew exactly what other people knew. But again, there were a couple artificial reasons as to why. Jack's not as sexy in terms of he didn't put up 100 points in WHL. He wasn't a top 15 pick who fell. He's a really solid player. He's a what do you call the kids like to say they're 200-foot players. He's a defense. He's solid on the defense. He's a sense-based guy. He was really young. He should have been playing in the USHL the year we drafted him, where maybe all of a sudden he puts up 70 or 80 points in that league, maybe be a little sexier. But I mean, he's a solid component in BU. A team that national championship aspirations. He's playing, second line minutes there. As I said, he's a really solid. Maybe not getting it because he's not sexy. And again, if you're going to go watch BU, if you're not watching Celebrini, you're going to watch Hudson. So he's also casting a shadow, which is great. I mean, I'd love to play with Celebrini. So there's a couple reasons maybe he's not as on people's tongues. And then again, you got the shiny new toys. I mean, we drafted Dvorak in the second round, and he's a big, giant, good skating defenseman. And you got Zimmer, who's like, ooh, wow, we didn't know that Zimmer was this good. Too bad he was hurt. But so, as I said, the cyclical nature of things, like Sokinski wins goalie of the year, right? Like the Kings are in the playoffs. So yeah, I mean, he's following his slow and steady development path. I'd like to see him gain a little bit more weight and a little more strength. He's probably a little bit behind in terms of physical development, maybe a little more on the Nick Dowd scale physically, which is going to make him take longer. But now this summer, this is the summer you hope he makes a sizable gain, in terms of strength and mass, because as I said, he's got a good framework, but he can't get the most out of the game he plays. He can't get the most out of it being physically outmatched.
Real final question, if that's all right.
I mean, you don't have to look at me.
All right.
This is your show, man.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say, apologies for not asking you who you're going to take with the 21st pick, but, we're recording this a month before the draft, so who knows?
We're going to take Salayev or Demidov.
Yeah, but theoretically, let's say the pick comes around, and there's 3 guys left in a tier, and they're all 6'3", they're all forwards, they're all perfect. We're taking him. One's a Gryffindor, one's a Slytherin, and one's a Ravenclaw. Who do you take?
Well, since I'm a dork, because my wife's a dork, my wife's a Gryffindor and I'm a Slytherin. Although I thought I was a Gryffindor. I really did. I don't know. I don't know.
I'd have pegged you for a Ravenclaw.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same, actually.
Well, I think there's a slight, and I don't mean this in a bad way, slight sociopathic thing, in terms of, Machiavellian, maybe the ends justify the means sometimes.
I mean, it's all made up, just so we're clear.
Yeah, right. So, as I said, I don't know.
All right.
It's a little.
All right.
We need a couple more.
I'd rather be a Gryffindor.
Mark Yannetti, official fan of He Who Shall Not Be Named. Listen, I'm a huge fan of you. Thank you
Fear
so much.
the name only.
Appreciate you coming in, as always, and we'll talk to you after the draft.
Awesome.